Hey students. All right, so I showed you how to throw a mug on the pottery wheel, and now I'm going to show you how to attach a handle. So yesterday I threw a bunch of mugs and pulled a bunch of handles, and what I often do is I put them on, this is just all sitting on a wood table, but if you're doing one at a time, you're going to want to have a wear board, and what I do is I put it on a piece of wood, and then I drape plastic over the top. And the next day, it's in perfect leather form condition for me to attach handles onto it. So it's leather hard in the sense that it's going to hold its form, okay? But it's also soft enough that you can still make marks in it, right? Awesome. All right. So, let's get this best setup here so you can see what I'm doing. So, as I said, I pulled a bunch of handles yesterday. So, we've got what we need. All right, so let's take a mug. I had this one set aside for us, but you can see where it's starting to dry on the top. This is like a lighter white color, and this is a darker gray. So this is going to be too dry for me to attach a handle because that's the top of the mug. So for me to attach a handle right here, it's going to be too dry once it turns that white color. So I might end up adding maybe like some kind of funky low handle here, or just letting it be a tumbler. So I need to grab a piece that is more evenly dry. So this piece is leather hard all the way. There's no like little white area. Okay, so this is the piece I'll choose to use today. So a lot of times you might want to, before you put your handle on, put your piece on the wheel and trim up the base. Okay, one little trick, if you don't want to trim, trimming is really, really fun. But if you don't want to trim, you can take your pot when it's leather hard and lay it on the table and kind of give it this look on the bottom. So basically I've laid it on the table and then I've rounded off all of the edges by just moving it in this sort of circular direction and putting pressure on the edge point of the base of the rim, just like that. All right, that kind of cleans up the bottom edge a little bit. And then I can take a sponge and I can sort of clean up around that, making it kind of a nice little way to finish your piece off without having to trim. And then I can also wipe down the base here, the very bottom of my mug, and clean that up too. So that's another option if you don't want to trim. So I've got my serrated rib. It's got all these little serrations on it. You can also use a fork. I've also got some slip. Then I also just have like a paintbrush with a little bit of water. Let's get to it. All right, so I'm going to choose my mug, pick a handle here. All right, and first step is to kind of line up the mug with the handle and see what works. This one looks a little big. This handle might be a good size. Either way, you're going to be cutting them down. You're always cutting your handles down. So don't ever think you're going to use it at the full size. I have a little ding in this one, so I was just smoothing out that edge. So we're going to use this handle. Again, these are all leather hard. I pulled them yesterday and then covered them with plastic so they didn't totally dry on me. All right. So first step, when I have my pulled handle, is instead of just cutting it right off at the sort of perpendicular to the floor, I'm going to cut it off at an angle. So let's see if I can show you this. Instead of cutting it just like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it like that. All right. So here I go. Cut it at an angle, just like that. I'm just using my rib. You can use a fettling knife for this. You could use a needle tool. All right. So I've cut it, as you can see, at a little bit of an angle, opposed to straight up and down. And that gives me like a little bit more square footage in terms of amount of space here on the clay, an area that I can attach to my cup. So I like to try to make as much surface space there as possible. All right, so now I'm gonna sort of find where I want to attach my mug. If you see any dings or bumps on your pot, that can sometimes be a good spot. All right, so I'm gonna put it right here. I'm just lining up my handle here to see about how long I want it. And I'm saying I want to cut it right about here. Again, it's always better to cut less because you can always cut more. But once again, I'm going to cut instead of just taking it and chopping it off right here, I'm going to give it a little bit of an angular cut. So I have a little bit more surface area when it's time to attach. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm coming in at an angle here, and you can see that I've cut that on an angle. So when I go to put it there, I've got a little bit more surface area for slipping and scoring. All right, so I'm going to hold up my handle to my mug, and I think it actually looks maybe just a little bit big. I think I'm going to take off just a touch more. In general, you want your handle to come out about half as big as the circle is in diameter. So if the circle's this far across the top, you want to kind of take that in half, and that half measurement is about how big you want your handle to stick out. So I'm going to cut my just a little bit shorter here, just a little bit. There we go. And do a little bit more shaping and smoothing of my handle. Sometimes things get stuck to it. All right. And now that's looking really good. All right. So I've decided where my handle is going to be attached. So I'm going to use my serrated rib, or you can use a fork. All right, so I am just going to score up the area where my handle is going to attach at the top. Okay, now I'm going to score up the area where my handle will be attached at the bottom. All right, then I'll do the same thing on my handle. So where it's going to be attached, I'm going to score that up really well. Okay, same thing on the bottom. Get that all scored up. Okay, all right, next step is to take a little bit of slip. And you can use your finger, you can use your fork, you can use whatever you want. I'm just going to use the rib. I'm going to take some of the slip here and just glop it on the area of the handles that I'll be attaching right where I've scored already, and same thing on my cup. All right, so now all surfaces are slipped. Okay, so now it's easy. You just stick it on, right? So don't forget, when you're slipping and scoring, you go to attach two pieces of clay. You're going to press it together, and then you're going to give it that little bit of pressure and jiggle back and forth just like this, so that it can sort of attach to itself like Velcro. Okay, then I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom with my handle. I'm going to press it down, jiggle it back and forth a little bit to really help it lock in. Okay, and just smooth it out. All right, I'm supporting on the interior of the mug, so I have something to sort of press against. And then what I like to do is I like to take off all the extra slip that I can before I even start smoothing, because you don't want things to get too wet. They'll just get flimsy if they're too wet. So now I've got the handle attached, all right? And now it just comes down to smoothing. Now, a lot of the times I'll look at my handle head on like this, and I see that from the top, it needs to be adjusted a little bit. So this can be a really good way to look at your mug, is you want to look at it from the top, and then sometimes you can make some adjustments. You're still able to sort of de-shape or unshape your mug as well as you're doing this. So you do want to be careful using pressure, but gentle pressure as we're attaching this handle. Now, a lot of times what I see is on the very top, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a crack in there. There's a space where the top of the handle catches the mug, and we don't want to see a crack in there. So what I often do is, from a part of the handle that I've already cut off, I usually find some soft clay from a part of the handle, just a little tiny piece of clay. And a lot of times what I do is I just roll like this itty bitty coil, all right? And then a lot of times what I do is I pinch the coil so one side of it is pointy, all right? And then I take that pointy side and I work it right down in to the top joining section there. Let me get a tool. Okay, so here's a wooden tool where you can really see how we push in that coil. Then I take the excess off either side, just like that. But I let that extra clay help join these two together so that there doesn't end up being an area where there's a big seam, because seams will turn into cracks and cracks will turn into breakage. So I'm using the back side of my wooden tool to just get right all around the spot where I've attached this handle, all right, and to just totally smooth it out. This little area can be tricky, so I like to make sure that I've done a really good job attaching this, especially, you know, the top attachment here opposed to the bottom. This is the attachment that takes all the torque when you lift up a mug. This is where all the pressure comes. So you really want this top attachment to be super secure and strong. So I'm just going to come in here with my wooden tool, my trusty wooden tool. It's one of my favorites. It's got a nice hooked edge on one side and then a beautiful point on the other side for trimming on the wheel and smoothing. Helps you get into those little areas your fingers can't quite reach. Right? And I'm just using my wooden tool to make sure that that area is smoothed and secure. I see another little spot that could use just a little bit more love there. So I'm going to add the tiniest coil right there as well, using my wooden tool to smooth that out. What I'm looking to avoid is any visible seam, because again, that will turn into a crack, and we want to avoid those. All right, sometimes you can remove a little bit of the excess if you don't need it, but you just want to do it with a smooth and steady hand. All right. And as always, if it's an area that your finger can fit in, that's usually a great tool to use, is your hand. And just smooth this all over. All right, so I've got it as smooth as I'm going to be able to get it with a tool here. The next step up here is to take a sponge, all right, to where I've attached the handle, and I'm just going to smooth around all those little areas that I used my wooden tool and my finger for. Sponge here. Just re-smooth this area. A lot of the secret of putting on a handle is once you actually get it attached, you want to smooth it, make it look like it was there all along. And that's often the real secret. So I got my sponge in there and I got it smooth. And last step is I take a paintbrush with just a little bit of water and then I shake the water off. You don't want it too wet. And I just kind of paint this area, just using the bristles of the brush to help smooth this handle attachment. All right. So there's that top attachment looking pretty good. Okay. And now I'm just going to do the same thing to the bottom. So I've already got the bottom attached on. I don't have a need to make a little tiny coil to add to this. I think all I need to do is use my paintbrush that I shake the water out of and just come around the entire connection and make sure that the seam is smooth as can be. Again, you don't want to add a lot of water, because what happens when there's a lot of water is then it actually dries at a different speed than the rest of the clay around it. And that in itself, that action of two different moisture levels of clay drying at different speeds can cause cracking. So you want to try not to make it super wet and try to keep all your clay around the same moisture level. And now I'm just doing some finishing work here, guys. So I'm just coming around with my sponge, seeing any areas that I can smooth or make a little bit more even. Anything else I want to touch up around the rim of my mug. Now's the time, because once this gets on the shelf and gets bone dry, there's no more edits that can be made in construction. All right, so there's my mug. There's my handle. Looks fairly proportioned to my piece. Maybe it could be a little bit smaller, but I wanted it to still be big enough that fingers can fit in there. I have a pretty big hand, so that is how to attach a handle to a mug.